The cathedral fell silent when Rosa spoke. "This wedding is a trap. He killed my sister Elena and drove away." Alexander Sterling's hands shook. His rich bride Isabella knew everything. 500 guests watched his perfect life fall apart. Sometimes the truth comes at the worst possible moment. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. "Excuse me, but this wedding is a trap," whispered the poor girl standing beside the altar, her trembling voice cutting through the sacred silence of the magnificent cathedral. Alexander Sterling, heir to the Sterling Industries empire, stood frozen in his expensive tuxedo, the golden wedding ring slipping from his shocked fingers. The entire congregation of 500 elite guests gasped in unison, their voices echoing through the marble halls like thunder. The girl who had spoken was not his bride. Isabella Montgomery, draped in her $50,000 designer wedding gown, stood at the altar looking equally stunned. The mysterious girl was much younger, perhaps 17, wearing a simple blue dress that had clearly seen better days. Her dark hair was disheveled, and her brown eyes burned with desperate urgency. "Security!" shouted Isabella's father, his face red with embarrassment and rage. But Alexander raised his hand, stopping the approaching guards. Something about the girl's terrified expression reminded him of someone he had tried to forget. "Wait," he commanded, his voice carrying the authority of a man worth billions. "Let her speak." The girl looked directly into Alexander's piercing blue eyes, tears streaming down her face. "My name is Rosa Martinez. 3 months ago you killed my sister Elena in a hit-and-run accident. Tonight you're marrying the woman who helped you cover it up." The cathedral erupted in chaos. Guests began talking frantically, cameras flashed from hidden photographers, and Isabella's mother fainted dramatically into her husband's arms. But Alexander heard none of it. The blood drained from his face as memories flooded back like a nightmare he couldn't escape. 3 months earlier, Alexander had been driving home from a business dinner, slightly intoxicated and completely reckless. He remembered the rain, the dark road, and the sickening thud when his Lamborghini struck something. He had stopped, seen the broken body of a young woman lying motionless, and panicked. Instead of calling for help, he had driven away, leaving her to die alone on the empty street. The next morning, consumed by guilt and terror, he had confessed everything to Isabella. But instead of encouraging him to turn himself in, she had orchestrated an elaborate cover-up. She used her family's connections to have the security cameras mysteriously malfunction, bribed witnesses to stay silent, and even arranged for Alexander's car to be quickly repaired and repainted. "You're lying," Isabella hissed at Rosa, her beautiful face contorting with rage. "This is some pathetic attempt to extort money from us." Rosa pulled out a small, worn photograph from her pocket. "This is Elena. She was 22 years old, working 3 jobs to support our family. She was walking home from her night shift at the hospital when you killed her and drove away like she was nothing." Alexander stared at the photograph, and his heart shattered completely. The young woman in the picture had the same gentle smile, the same kind eyes as Rosa. She looked innocent and full of life, everything that Alexander's selfish actions had destroyed forever. "She was going to be a nurse," Rosa continued, her voice breaking with emotion. "She wanted to help people, to save lives. But you took that away from her. You took her away from us." The priest, an elderly man who had known Alexander since childhood, stepped forward with obvious distress. "My son, is this true?" Alexander looked around the cathedral at all the faces staring at him, his parents, his business associates, his friends. For 28 years, he had lived a life of privilege and power, believing that money could solve any problem and that consequences were for ordinary people. But now, standing before this brave girl who had risked everything to seek justice for her sister, Alexander finally understood the weight of his actions. He thought about Elena Martinez, dying alone on a dark road while he sped away to protect his reputation and his fortune. "Yes," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "It's true." The cathedral fell into stunned silence. Isabella grabbed his arm desperately. "Alexander, don't be ridiculous. You're letting this girl manipulate you with her sob story." But Alexander pulled away from her, his eyes never leaving Rosa's face. "How did you find out it was me?" Rosa's hands shook as she spoke. Elena was still alive when the ambulance found her. She lived for 2 hours in the hospital. Before she died, she described the car and gave them a partial license plate number. The police said there wasn't enough evidence to investigate properly, but I never stopped looking. I spent 3 months working as a cleaning lady in office buildings, sleeping in bus stations, following every lead. I saw your car parked outside a restaurant last week. I followed you home and confirmed the license plate. Then I discovered you were getting married today. Alexander felt his entire world crumbling around him. Everything he had built, everything he had achieved, was meaningless compared to the life he had stolen and the family he had destroyed. What do you want from me? He asked Rosa quietly. I want you to face justice, Rosa replied with simple dignity. I want you to admit what you did and accept the consequences. My sister deserves that much. Isabella stepped between them, her voice sharp and calculating. Rosa, isn't it? I'm sure we can work something out. My family has considerable resources. Name your price and we can make this unpleasant situation disappear. Rosa looked at Isabella with disgust. You think you can buy my sister's life? You think money can erase murder? It wasn't murder, Isabella snapped. It was an accident. Alexander never intended to hurt anyone. An accident? Rosa's voice rose with righteous anger. The accident was hitting her. The crime was leaving her to die alone on that road. The evil was covering it up and pretending it never happened. Alexander watched this exchange, seeing Isabella clearly for the first time. The woman he had planned to marry was not just helping him avoid consequences. She was actively trying to silence his victim's family with bribes. The realization made him physically sick. Father Rodriguez, Alexander called to the priest. I need to make a confession. Alexander, no. Isabella screamed, grabbing at his arm. Think about what you're doing. Think about your future. But Alexander gently removed her hands and walked toward Rosa. I killed your sister, he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. I was driving drunk, I hit her with my car, and I left her to die because I was a coward who cared more about my reputation than her life. The cathedral erupted again, but this time Alexander didn't care. He pulled out his phone and dialed the police. This is Alexander Sterling. I need to report a crime. 3 months ago, I committed vehicular manslaughter and fled the scene. I'm ready to turn myself in. As he spoke to the dispatcher, giving them all the details, Rosa began to cry. Not tears of anger this time, but tears of relief. For 3 months, she had carried the burden of seeking justice for Elena alone. Now, finally, someone was listening. Isabella's family and their guests began fleeing the cathedral, desperate to distance themselves from the scandal. But Alexander's parents approached slowly, their faces filled with shame and sorrow. Son, his father said quietly, we're proud of you for telling the truth. His mother embraced Rosa gently. I'm so sorry for your loss, dear. If there's anything we can do to help your family. Rosa looked surprised by their kindness. I don't want your money. I just wanted the truth. The police arrived within minutes, their sirens wailing outside the cathedral. As they read Alexander his rights and placed handcuffs on his wrists, he felt something he hadn't experienced in months, peace. Rosa, he called as they led him toward the police car. I know I can never bring Elena back, but I promise you this, I will spend the rest of my life trying to make amends for what I've done. Rosa nodded, her eyes still filled with tears. Elena always said that everyone deserves a chance to make things right. Even you. The weeks following Alexander's arrest were a whirlwind of media attention and legal proceedings. The story of the millionaire who confessed at his own wedding became international news. Some portrayed Rosa as a hero, while others criticized her for disrupting a sacred ceremony. But Rosa didn't care about public opinion. She only cared that Elena's voice had finally been heard. Alexander's lawyers, paid for by his family, tried desperately to negotiate a plea deal that would minimize his sentence. They argued that his voluntary confession showed genuine remorse and should be considered in his favor. But Alexander surprised everyone by refusing their help. I don't want a reduced sentence, he told his legal team during one heated meeting. Elena Martinez died because of my choices. Rosa Martinez has spent months seeking justice while I lived in luxury. I deserve whatever punishment the court decides. His lawyers were bewildered. Never in their experience had a wealthy client refused their attempts to minimize consequences. But Alexander had fundamentally changed since that night at the cathedral. The man who had once believed money could solve any problem now understood that some things were beyond the reach of wealth. Meanwhile, Rosa returned to her family's small apartment in the poorest section of the city. Her parents, Miguel and Carmen Martinez, had been devastated by Elena's death and initially skeptical of Rosa's quest for justice. They feared their youngest daughter would only bring more pain to their already broken family. Mija, her mother said gently as Rosa sat at their kitchen table, you did a brave thing. Elena would be proud. But now you must think about your own future. You cannot live in the past forever. Rosa nodded, understanding her mother's concern. But she couldn't simply return to her old life as if nothing had happened. Elena's death had changed her in ways she was still discovering. The shy, quiet girl who had once dreamed of becoming a teacher was gone, replaced by someone with a fierce understanding of injustice and an unshakable determination to fight it. The trial took place 6 months later, and it was unlike anything the legal community had ever witnessed. Alexander pled guilty to all charges, including vehicular manslaughter, leaving the scene of an accident, and obstruction of justice. His confession was detailed and unflinching. He admitted to drinking at the business dinner, to speeding on the wet roads, to the moment of impact, and to his cowardly decision to flee. When the judge asked if he had anything to say before sentencing, Alexander stood and faced Rosa's family, who had attended every day of the proceedings. "I cannot bring Elena back," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I cannot undo the 3 months of pain I caused this family by hiding the truth. But I can promise that I will spend every remaining day of my life working to honor Elena's memory and to prevent other families from experiencing the pain I have caused the Martinez family." The judge sentenced him to 8 years in prison, a substantial sentence that sent a clear message about the consequences of hit-and-run crimes. But Alexander's real punishment began much earlier, the moment he looked into Rosa's eyes and saw the depth of pain his selfishness had caused. From prison, Alexander began the complicated process of establishing the Elena Martinez Foundation. He donated his entire inheritance, nearly $50 million, to provide scholarships for young people from low-income families who wanted to pursue careers in healthcare. The foundation would also fund free medical clinics in underserved communities and support families who had lost loved ones to hit-and-run accidents. Rosa, despite her initial reluctance, eventually agreed to help run the foundation. At first, she had been suspicious of Alexander's motives, wondering if this was just another attempt by a wealthy man to buy his way out of guilt. But as months passed and she saw the genuine commitment behind the foundation's work, her perspective began to shift. Working with the foundation required Rosa to complete her own education, something that had been impossible after Elena's death when the family had lost their primary income. The foundation provided her with a full scholarship to study law, with the understanding that she would eventually take over its operations. Rosa threw herself into her studies with the same determination she had shown in seeking justice for Elena. She specialized in cases involving hit-and-run accidents and corporate cover-ups, becoming an expert in the legal loopholes that allowed wealthy criminals to escape consequences. Her goal was to ensure that other families wouldn't have to fight alone for justice the way she had. During her second year of law school, Rosa began corresponding with Alexander in prison. These letters started as purely professional communications about the foundation's operations, but gradually evolved into something deeper, a dialogue about guilt, forgiveness, and the possibility of redemption. Alexander wrote about his daily life in prison, where he taught literacy classes to other inmates and worked in the prison library. He described how incarceration had stripped away all the external markers of success he had once valued, forcing him to confront who he really was beneath the wealth and privilege. Rosa wrote about her studies, about the cases she was following, and about the slow process of healing her family was experiencing. She also wrote about Elena, sharing memories that helped Alexander understand not just the life he had taken, but the person Elena had been. "Elena used to say that everyone has the capacity for both good and evil," Rosa wrote in one letter. "She believed that our choices, not our circumstances, determine which side ultimately wins. I think she would be proud of the choice you made at the cathedral, even though it came too late to save her." 3 years into his sentence, Alexander received devastating news. His father had suffered a massive heart attack and died suddenly. The Sterling family empire, built over 3 generations, was in chaos without its patriarch's leadership. Alexander's mother begged him to accept early parole to help save the family business. But Alexander made a decision that shocked everyone who knew him. He refused parole and signed documents transferring all remaining family assets to the Elena Martinez Foundation. He would serve his full sentence, and when he was released he would dedicate his life entirely to the foundation's work. "My father built an empire by putting profit above people," Alexander wrote to Rosa. "I won't make the same mistake. Some things are more important than money." 5 years into his sentence, Alexander received an unexpected visitor. Rosa, now 22 and confident in a way that reminded him powerfully of Elena's photograph, sat across from him in the prison visiting room. She had graduated law school at the top of her class and had just won her first major case, successfully prosecuting a wealthy businessman who had killed a pedestrian and attempted to cover it up. The victory had made national news and established Rosa as a formidable advocate for victims' rights. I wanted to tell you something, she said. Elena's favorite quote was from Maya Angelou: "There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. You told the truth when it mattered most. I think she would have forgiven you for that." Alexander felt tears he had been holding back for years finally fall. "I dream about her sometimes. About what would have happened if I had stopped to help instead of running away." "We can't change the past," Rosa said gently. "But we can honor her memory by making sure her death meant something. The foundation has helped 800 students so far. 800 young people who might become doctors, nurses, paramedics, people who save lives instead of destroying them." She paused, then continued with emotion in her voice. "Last week I met a young man named Carlos. He's in his final year of medical school, studying to become an emergency room doctor. He told me that Elena's story inspired him to specialize in trauma medicine. He wants to save people like her." Alexander listened in amazement as Rosa described the ripple effects of Elena's legacy. Medical students who cited Elena as their inspiration. Nurses who carried her photo in their pockets. A new hospital wing named in her honor. All of it funded by the foundation that had grown from the ashes of Alexander's former life. "There's something else," Rosa said, her voice softening. "My mother wants to meet you." Alexander looked up in surprise. "Mrs. Martinez wants to meet me?" "She says Elena appeared to her in a dream last week. Elena told her that forgiveness is the only way to truly honor the dead. My mother wants to give you something." 2 weeks later, Carmen Martinez entered the prison visiting room, clutching a small wrapped package. She was a small woman, worn down by years of hard work and recent grief, but her eyes held a strength that reminded Alexander immediately of both her daughters. She sat across from him in silence for several minutes, studying his face. Finally, she spoke in accented but clear English. "My Elena was a good girl," she said simply. "She always saw the best in people even when they could not see it themselves. She would not want me to carry hatred in my heart." She pushed the package across the table. "This was Elena's. She wore it every day. I want you to have it." Alexander opened the package with trembling hands. Inside was a small silver cross on a delicate chain, simple, inexpensive but clearly treasured. A note was attached in Rosa's handwriting. "Elena believed everyone deserves a chance at redemption." Carmen Martinez reached across the table and took Alexander's hands in hers. "You cannot bring back my daughter," she said, tears flowing freely. "But you have honored her memory. You have turned her death into life for others. For this I forgive you." Alexander broke down completely, sobbing with a grief and gratitude he had never allowed himself to feel. This woman, who had every right to hate him, was offering him the forgiveness he didn't deserve but desperately needed. When Alexander was finally released after serving his full 8-year sentence, he emerged into a world that had largely forgotten the scandal of his wedding day confession. But he didn't seek to reclaim his old life or rebuild his family's empire. Instead, he moved into a modest apartment near the Foundation's headquarters and dedicated himself entirely to its mission. Rosa, now a successful lawyer and the Foundation's executive director, worked alongside him daily. Their relationship had evolved into something neither quite knew how to define. Not quite friendship, not romance, but a deep connection forged through shared purpose and mutual respect. On the 10th anniversary of Elena's death, they stood together at her gravesite. The simple headstone was surrounded by flowers from the hundreds of lives the Foundation had touched. Alexander placed the silver cross that Carmen Martinez had given him at the base of the stone. "I never told you why I really came to your wedding that day," Rosa said quietly. Alexander looked at her in surprise. "What do you mean?" "I had been planning to confront you privately. But when I saw you at that altar, about to promise to love and honor someone while living with such a terrible lie, I realized that your wedding wasn't just about you and Isabella. It was about the kind of man you were choosing to be." She turned to face him. "Elena always said that our truest self is revealed in moments of crisis. At the altar that day you could have had me removed, could have continued living your lie. Instead you chose truth. That choice changed everything." Alexander nodded, understanding finally why that moment at the cathedral had felt like both an ending and a beginning. "She saved us both, didn't she?" "Elena." "Yes," Rosa agreed. "She did." As they walked away from the cemetery together, Alexander realized that the girl who had interrupted his wedding had given him something far more valuable than the life of privilege he had lost. She had given him the chance to become a man Elena Martinez might have been proud to know. The wedding that was meant to be the beginning of Alexander's perfect life had instead become the moment he finally found his soul. And sometimes in the quiet of his modest apartment, he whispered a prayer of gratitude to a young nurse named Elena Martinez, whose sister's courage had saved them both and whose legacy continued to save countless others.